The class is not cross-cultural. I will bring in ideas from Eastern thought. I lived in Asia for a few years, worked there, studied and continue to study the Eastern philosophies and psychologies, but my training primarily is in Western psychology, and the focus of the class will be that. However, that doesn't mean that positive psychology doesn't apply to people from different places in the world. Now, there was recently a meeting between senior scientists, psychologists from the West, people like Paul Ekman, Richie Davidson, some of the most important minds in the field of psychology, meeting with the Dalai Lama and some of his monks. And they were talking about the future of psychology, about research and how can you research meditation and so on. And one of the things that they were talking a lot about is cross-cultural differences. And when that came up, the Dalai Lama suddenly seemed uneasy. And when Daniel Goleman, who was writing about this whole event, which was held in India, asked him, what's wrong? The Dalai Lama said that he was not comfortable with talking and emphasizing so much cultural differences. Now, you can say many things about the Dalai Lama. One thing you cannot say about him is that he's culturally insensitive. Arguably, one of the most sensitive people alive. And yet he says that we're focusing too much on cultural differences. And he added, not because there are no cultural differences. Of course there are, and they're important. But there are many more similarities than differences. And we shouldn't ignore those similarities. Daniel Goleman about the Dalai Lama. We were a little surprised by the Dalai Lama's seeming resistance to the notion of cultural differences. So I will introduce these ideas, but A, because it's not my training, and there are people who focus on cultural differences who would do a much better job than I do, and second, because what I hope to look into is the universal, things that are common across cultures. So we'll study research in this area, but even more than that, we'll become even more particular than just talking about the psychology in this part of the world. We'll study yourself. We're going to go that particular. Now, why? See, when I put this class together, I didn't think to myself, okay, so what are the things that I need to introduce in order to please the participants in the class, the students? That's not what I thought. What I thought about what was the class that I would have wanted to take as an undergraduate here? What would help me become happier if I were sitting there? In other words, thinking about it from my perspective, from a very personal perspective. In this class, I'm going to encourage you, of course, you look at research and read research about other people, about large sample sizes, but I'm going to encourage you more than anything to look inside yourselves, to study yourselves, whether it's through response papers that will be due weekly, starting in 2 weeks, whether it's in your final project, that will be a presentation that you won't have to give, but you'll have to write out, a presentation about your favorite topic or the topic that matters most to you, whether it's in sections that you'll be talking about, how can I apply these ideas to my life? The time ins are about thinking about how can I take these ideas and use them. It's about studying ourselves. Because as Carl Rogers says, what is most personal is most general. What is most personal is most general. And as Maslow adds, we must remember that knowledge of one's own deep nature is also simultaneously knowledge of human nature in general. When we understand ourselves better, when we identify ourselves, we're better able to identify with others. In fact, this in many ways is the source of empathy, of healthy empathy. And there's some studies on this showing that people who know themselves, who study themselves, who are self-reflective, display less egregious behavior, less immoral behavior toward others. Behavior that would fall under, say, racism. And it's counterintuitive to some extent. Wait, don't you need to first study the other so that you can be more sensitive to other? Yes, that too. But it's not enough. It's important to also study ourselves, because when we see our deep nature, what we encounter there is actually part of the universal nature. the similarities among us all, regardless of where we're from. And this is what the Dalai Lama was talking about. Not stop cross-cultural, do it, important, but at the same time not ignore the self, not ignore the universal within each one of us. C.S. Lewis, there is one thing and only one in the whole universe which we know more about than we could learn from external observation. That one thing is ourselves. We have, so to speak, inside information. We are in the know.